in the country and would be the president's first legislative victory. An overhaul of the tax system. A vote could come as early as next week, but all of a sudden there are some stumbling blocks. Phil Mattingly joins us now from Capitol Hill with the latest. So you've been talking to Republican sources, obviously. What are they telling you about where this bill stands right now?
Well, look, there's no question about it, Anderson. Republican leaders were sent scrambling today. They've got 2 senators with health issues, and they've got a handful of other senators with legitimate policy issues. Most noteworthy, Senator Marco Rubio, coming out as a firm no vote on the bill if there were not changes to the child tax credit. You also have Susan Collins, who hasn't committed one way or the other yet. Bob Corker, who voted no the first time around. None of his major issues had been addressed in this current legislation. Senator Jeff Flake, also on the fence as well. All this underscores kind of a key point here, Anderson. While Senate Republican leaders and House Republican leaders announced that they had a deal in principle on Wednesday, a deal does not make a bill. That's where they are right now. They're negotiating behind the scenes. Anderson, leaders have told me that they feel like they will get there. They feel like the votes are there as long as they line everything up. But as it currently stands, as of this moment, they are still working to lock all that in just a few short days before they're expected to take that vote, Anderson.
You talk about Rubio saying it's a no vote. I mean, is that a bluff? Is that a negotiation tactic?
Look, there's no question there's an element of that, but I think it's worth noting that this isn't something that's new. Leaders were surprised by this hardline stance, no question about that. But Senator Rubio has been talking about the refundability piece of the child tax credit for a long time during this debate. His amendment to try and change that during the Senate debate failed. He was told that there could be no increase of the corporate tax rate to try and pay for things. Well, Republican leaders have agreed to increase the corporate tax rate to pay for other things. That's where this all came from, some behind-the-scenes frustration that they weren't willing to address this. Now, here's what I'm told at this moment. GOP leaders are amenable to changes, not going as far as Senator Rubio wants. That probably costs too much, according to these leaders, but doing something behind the scenes to address this. I will note, though, several senators have made the point that Marco Rubio being the tax vote that ends up sinking this overhaul seems very unlikely to them. Several Senate aides saying the same thing. The idea that he could be a deciding vote, they don't necessarily believe it. But there's no question about it, Anderson. As of this point, at least throughout the course of the day, Senator Rubio was not budging from this stance. He's going to get something. The question is, will it be enough?
Have you sensed hesitancy in general, or any hesitancy about moving forward on this, especially given the fact that this bill has approval ratings in the low 30s and 20s right now? Or do they just want to get it done?
To be blunt, no, and that's exactly right. They want to get it done. And I think this kind of underscores how this entire process has worked. Keep in mind, nobody thought this could be done in the timeline that they're working on right now. There's a reason this hasn't been done in 31 years. A tax overhaul, there's sacred cows, there's corporate interests, there's all sorts of things that make this near impossible. And yet, over the course of 2 months, they are on the verge of actually doing this. And the reason why, when you talk to all parties involved, political imperative. You talked about the lack of legislative wins. You look at the approval ratings of people around the country electorally. They recognize that something has to happen. They ran on these issues. There are certainly members who believe strongly in this bill, believe strongly in the end game of the policy. But perhaps more important than anything else, the overarching theme here, members know they need to get something, anything done before the end of the year. And that, more than anything else, is why Republican leaders in both the House and Senate think the votes will be there next week. But as I said, there's more work to do. They're planning on unveiling this bill tomorrow. Work continues tonight, Anderson.
Phil Mattingly, thanks very much. A lot to talk about tonight. Joining me are Tara Setmayer, Mike Shields, Bakari Sellers, Stephen Moore, and Angela Rye. Do you think they're going to get it done?
I think so. The stakes are just entirely too high at this point. Everyone is all in on this. I think this is smart political strategy by Marco Rubio. He's been telegraphing this somewhat in recent days, where he tweeted his annoyance with the fact that during the amendment process, they voted down his amendment along with Senator Mike Lee. They've been working on this child credit together. They want $2,000 at least, and they voted that down during the amendment period because the idea was you would have to raise the corporate tax rate up 1%, well, actually 0.94%, from 20% to 20.94%. And that was told, oh, no, that's too much. It's going to hurt growth. And Mark 21%. And that's okay. But when we wanted to do expanded child tax credit, it wasn't. So he's kind of let them know And this is, Marco Rubio can turn back. Even if he loses it, he can go back and say, I fought hard for this middle class. This would help the middle class with the child tax.
Mike, I mean, the president said he thinks Rubio will be there for sure.
Yeah, I do too. And it's a little bit like when you're in the airport and you see the people that are yelling get their way. If you keep giving way to the bad actors, pretty soon a good actor starts asking for something, right? And he's got every right to do it. But I think the key point is it's going to pass. He's going to vote for it. He's probably going to get a little bit of what he wants. That's good negotiating on his part. And what he's talking about, so people understand, is the child tax credit's going up, right? So that's why this is a middle-class tax cut. 70% of the country doesn't itemize because it's too complicated. They use the standard deduction. The standard deduction is going to double in this. So you have a child tax credit that could double, you have the standard deduction doubling, and it's a tax bill that creates jobs. If we just said those three things over and over again, we would have cut through a lot more of what you're talking about in our messaging, because this is a middle-class tax cut, and it creates jobs. When you have corporations coming into the country, they create more jobs, it makes us more competitive, and that helps the middle class as well.
My experience.
Nobody believes that Marco Rubio is going to be the one for Democrats who's a savior or the one who actually torpedoes this tax bill. No. I mean, Marco Rubio has about as much courage as a mammal in Oz, which we know is not a whole lot. And so my point in saying that is this.
Wait,
this bill
is mammal in Oz?
That's a new one, Bakari.
Wasn't it a big cat in Oz who needed a heart in Oz? Who was that?
It was the Tin Man.
Oh, it was a Tin Man. Courage Courage. There we go.
Right,
there you go. Lifeline. Thank you, Angela. That's why you're here.
I get hung up in little details.
Little detail. That was like a sports analogy to Anderson for a second.
Exactly.
Anyway, he does not have the courage to save this. With all of that being said, this is very close to not passing. If, for example, they seated Doug Jones, as they should seat Doug Jones, as we did before the Affordable Care Act, then you're at a 49-51.
Well, do you know that's how he'd vote? He represents a state that went 64 for
I'm pretty
Trump.
certain because
he said he wouldn't vote for it?
You know why I know he would vote for it? Because he got there on the backs of black women, and black women are not going to benefit from this tax bill. Middle class black women won't.
I didn't know he'd come out against it.
I will particularly tell you that he's pretty clear.
He doesn't want to have to take this vote. Let me tell you.
Anyway,
He doesn't want to be seated and have to vote against it.
It will be 51-49. And with Corker and with the fact that we're praying for John McCain, this bill is up in the air.
Stephen?
Well, Marco Rubio certainly caused a lot of heart palpitations today with his injection into this debate. You're right. I mean, he's going to vote for the bill. He's going to get what he wants.
Like the mammal in Oz.
The thing that worries me a little bit is, look, you're right. By the way, this vote will happen next week before the new senator is sworn in. But it's a 51. They have 51 votes, and that means they can only lose one. And so that gives power to anyone. My worry, Anderson, is that now anyone can say, well, wait a minute, I want this, I want that, and you get a flood of Marco Rubios, and that just isn't going to work. I think it will pass. I think it will be, look, you got to admit, I mean, the stock market's just been going through the roof. Investors want this. Businesses want it. It's good for America. I think we'll get, 4% growth next year with this. And by the way,
just politically, for Republicans, though, I mean, if they did not do this, it would be
devastating.
It would be devastating. I mean, look,
devastating.
I think they understand they got to hang together here, or they're going to hang separately. And the way, look, it's true that the polls show a lot of people, are opposed to this because they don't think that there's anything in this for them. And one of the important points that Trump made in his press conference the other day is that they're going to start the withholding changes in February, and that means people are going to start to feel the effects of this. Middle class people, black women who are, incomes $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, or maybe married couples, they're going to see a $2,000, $3,000 reduction in their taxes, and I think it'll be popular and good for the economy, and I think it'll get done. I'm worried, by the way, about John McCain's health. I mean, there's rumors that he is. I love John McCain. I think he's one of the great heroes of America, but
we wish him well.
We're really worried about his health.
Yeah, Angela?
Well, a couple of things. I think it's interesting, Terry, where you started on the messaging, because I also think that Democrats have not handled the messaging of this very well.
How so?
To the point of itemized deductions. If they are too lazy or can't afford, someone who can itemize deductions for them, then yes, they get a benefit. But for folks who do take the time to itemize deductions, the fact that you get your mortgage interest deduction hit.
$750,000. That's a pretty rich person that has a $750,000.
But this is a rich person's tax bill, which is what.
No.
I'm not. I know that you had your turn. So let me have mine.
It's only people with homes over $750,000.
So you're gonna keep talking. So this is what I'm saying. I think it's important for us to understand it is a rich person's tax bill, and that's what Democrats should have been saying instead of the GOP tax scam. Given all that's happened in this administration with Russia, given all that's happened, there's one scandal after another. Tax scam has fallen on deaf ears, and it didn't even resonate with me. So one and the same, I think that we can push back a little bit and say we have some work to do.
I think Democrats have done a pretty good job of using which is, and even Senator Orrin Hatch got tired of that line that, oh, you're hurting the middle class to give tax cuts to the wealthy, to corporations. That's been used against Republicans for decades, which is why it's perplexing to me that Republicans didn't anticipate that and have proper messaging and stay on that to explain how this benefits. Yes, it's good for business, but it's also good for the middle class.
Bad policy, Tara.
There's problems with it, but there's also some good things that they're going to push this through. At least explain where the good parts are, and the Republicans haven't done a good job of it. Look at the approval ratings.
Should also talk about how the current tax code is pro-China, and this is a bill that China does not want, and that will speak for a lot of Americans.
China's the big loser.
We've got to take a quick break. The president still doesn't accept the evidence that Russia meddled in the election to support him. And new reporting in the Washington Post says those around him know better than to even bring it up. We'll talk to David Gergen about that and the panel coming up. Also, now that the former Apprentice contestant is no longer working in the White House, what is in the future for African-American outreach in the administration? A unique question for unique times. We'll talk about it ahead. New reporting tonight in the Washington Post says the president still doesn't accept evidence that Russia interfered and supported him in the election, and those around him know he gets agitated when he even hears about it. The Post spoke with current and former officials who say that his daily briefing is often structured to avoid upsetting him with Russian-related intel only in the written brief and not brought up in person. I talked about that with CNN senior political analyst David Gergen, who's an advisor to Presidents Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton. David, according to the Washington Post, the idea that the president doesn't even want to hear intelligence about Russia's meddling in the election is a stunning thing, and that briefers have to kind of figure out a workaround is really eye-opening.
It's unique, as far as I can tell, in all of American history. It's an alarming report, Anderson, partly because the Washington Post has interviewed more than 50 people. So it's built up a lot of background, and it's a more solidly built report. But what comes out of it is the president, because of his personal insecurities, not wanting to have his election diminished or discredited in some way. If he accepts the conclusion of his intelligence agencies that the Russians meddled, he thinks that's somehow going to diminish him, and he feels very uncomfortable about that. So he pushes it off.
Which he said publicly time and time again, but you kind of assume, well, maybe privately he's
exactly.
We're able to, that's just a public facade, but it's so deep and ingrained he can't get over it.
I think that's right. And what this story really makes clear, and what some of us, people have wondered about, is because of his aversion to hearing this, he still does not want reports in his intelligence briefing. They have to dance around gently so they don't irritate him in the briefings. But because of that aversion, the government itself is not taking the kind of aggressive actions you would expect from a government whose voting booths have been in effect, or whose voting processes have been manipulated by the Russians. Under ordinary circumstances, the president would order a crackdown. Let's figure out what happened. Right. Let's go after it. Let's pass laws. Let's hold the Russians accountable. None of that. So in effect, the elections coming up are much more vulnerable than they would be otherwise. A president whose insecurities are putting a threat, they're putting a danger over our own election process going forward.
Right, and this is something which the entire intelligence community has said, is concerned about. General Michael Hayden, former director of the CIA, says it's the political equivalent, the Russian meddling is the political equivalent of 9/11.
Yes. Yeah, well, that was a really, really interesting quote, I thought, because I hadn't seen in quite those graphic, dramatic terms. But if that's the conclusion of someone who's really seen the intelligence, I think we have to take it seriously. And what it says is that the Russian threat, this does not say that it tossed the election to Hillary. It does not say there was collusion. What it does say is that the meddling itself constituted a direct threat to American democracy, and that we are not cracking down on it as we should, and we're further at risk in future elections.
Well, what it does also is, for a president who's so obsessed with winning, it allows the Russians to win. If the idea of the strategy of the Russians was to sow discord, to meddle in the election, not only did they meddle in the election, they've also won by not allowing the United States to actually prevent it the next time.
Exactly, and let's see. The story also points out not just about the voting; it's about they wanted to increase political polarization. They wanted to increase polarization between the races in this country, and they wanted to diminish America's influence overseas. And they've accomplished all three of those without tossing the election necessarily, and still left us vulnerable. That's a very damning report.
It's incredible. David Gergen, thank you.
Thank you.
Back now with the panel. Joining the conversation also is former Congressman Jack Kingston. Mike, does this concern you? I mean, the idea that, because one reading of the Washington Post report is that the president's own, I don't know if it's insecurity or belief that people are trying to diminish him or diminish his totally legitimate election result is preventing him and preventing the U.S. government from really addressing a very serious national security problem.
And it's worth noting he's publicly said that he trusts his intelligence agencies and he believes that there was meddling. So
he did say that only after controversy.
He did, but he has said it publicly. So this is a report of people trying to characterize his briefings. Look, the Russians interfered in our elections, or at least they tried to. And it needs to be investigated. It's being investigated on Capitol Hill. I think the president should take a stronger stance in pushing back on this. But I also think we go a little too far. David Gergen just said they interfered with our processes. There's no evidence of that. There's evidence that they tried to influence the election by buying, Facebook ads and those sorts of things. As someone who does that, I can tell you what we've seen so far at a very, very, very minimal level. So there's no evidence they actually influenced the election. There's no evidence that they divided people the way that David Gergen discussed. So what frustrates the president, I believe, is that this turns into a partisan issue, and it becomes a political football. And so I don't think he should react to that. But but he does have a good point that this becomes and we're getting ready to hear it. It becomes a very partisan issue as opposed to just an investigation.
But just in terms of national security, that there has never been a cabinet level meeting to discuss future, cyber efforts to prevent Russian interference. I mean,
no, I agree with that. I think that they should take it. Look, I consider Russia as a state, not the people. The state of Russia is an enemy of the United States. When they do something like this is, in some countries, might be considered an act of war. We have to take it incredibly seriously, and I'm agreeing that the president should take it more seriously. However, I think that the tone of this, and I'm guessing we're going to hear it, goes into a partisan place that is also not appropriate because there's no evidence that the Russians actually changed the outcome of anything in the election.
Angela?
So having worked for the Committee on Homeland Security before I worked for the CBC, where I was very proud of the many things that we did on a bipartisan basis, being able to take an offensive look and approach towards a strategic approach towards cybersecurity was one of those spaces. And to me, it's maddening that we can't have a conversation about not only what Russia could do, but what any country could do, because it's one of our most vulnerable spaces. We do so much online, not just the ways in which precincts were vulnerable and attacked, and there's proof of that. It's not just Facebook ads. There are multiple spaces in which this was a problem.
And precincts like in voting machines. Have you seen any evidence?
But that's not what happened. But you're also minimalizing, and that's intellectually dishonest.
No, I'm trying to give context as opposed to becoming a partisan issue on one side.
I didn't make it partisan. I just made it nonpartisan.
Let's give context, because what we do know is that there have been a number of secretaries of state, and there have been a number of states where their voter rolls were hacked and voter information was taken.
21.
21 to be specific. So that's more than just buying Facebook ads. What we do know is that individuals impersonated Black Lives Matter activists in places like Ferguson and Baltimore to sow discord. That's more than just buying Facebook ads. What we do know is that John Podesta's emails were hacked and leaked by a Russian agent. That's more than just buying Facebook ads. And so what I'm saying is we can minimalize this all you want, and you can say it's just as trivial as you want, but that's not the facts. And the president of the United States, Democrat or Republican, if someone, and this is not a partisan issue, because what you've seen on the Hill is you've seen Democrats and Republicans alike.
Yeah.
You've seen Tom Tillis, who is the United States Senator from North Carolina, and Mark Warner work diligently in a nonpartisan fashion to make this happen. So do not minimize attacks on our democracy.
But I don't think anybody's minimalizing it, but I do think
the president is.
I don't think he is. And remember, part of his criticism of the Obama administration is that they always told our enemies what we were about to do. We're going to withdraw from the Middle East, from Iran at a certain time frame, for example. And so what I think part of his strategy is this to do things quietly. I mean, I do not
it's so
believe
quiet
should have
that
the CIA, no one knows but him.
the CIA, the Homeland Security, Mattis, McMaster's. Do you really think they're sitting
But let me
back?
tell you,
and-
can I tell you?
I don't think I don't think that Pompeo would be doing that.
But let me tell you how
I think
quiet it's
there's-
been, though, Jack. This is how quiet it's been. It's been so quiet that right now in Syria, Russia has now built and has an agreement to put 2 more Air Force bases.
Actually,
But let me
Syria's
tell
a
you,
great.
who was
That's a
the
great
president who
point, though.
bombed the Russian
let's
assets in
talk
Syria,
about
by the way?
Syria's a
He
great point.
bombed
Only one
an
guy.
Air Force base, and what did they do the next day?
All right, let's
They
not
sent
get-
planes
let's not
from
go into Syria for now.
But I'm just-
Tara,
yeah,
where are you on this?
Okay, so I worked for a member who also was on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and so we saw a lot of cybersecurity issues concerning China initially, years ago. In asymmetric warfare is what they used to call the cyber warfare attacks coming from China. And it would be naive to think that Russia wouldn't be involved in a similar strategy to attack the United States. And Russia has been involved. This is part of a 40-year strategy on Russia's part of reflexive control theory, which is basically perception management. And what they do, and they've done this in the Ukraine, they've done this in Europe, and now they have employed this tactic in the United States. They manipulate, they have disinformation campaigns, and they manipulate information to try to convince people of an outcome, of a predetermined outcome that the Russians actually want. If this is not a textbook example of this theory of reflexive control theory, I don't know what is. And for the President of the United States to be in denial about this because it hurts his little feelings
It's
is
not
a
denial.
scary
That
thing.
is so
He's in denial,
respectful to
Jack.
say that.
He has never criticized Vladimir Putin. Mike Shields just had a stronger attack on Putin than the President of the United States ever had after what the Russians have tried to do to this country. There's a problem with that.
Always want to make this personal. This
It's-
is an
it's-
American
it is,
issue.
because
Can
the
we all
president
agree
makes everything
that this is
personal.
an
Can we talk
American
about
issue?
what- okay, one at a time.
President makes everything personal, Jack. That's why we have to talk about it in this context. His ego is
you
so
don't.
fragile
we need to
that he
understand.
can't handle listening to a broad intelligence
but here's
briefing.
where this is exactly what I'm talking about. So it goes from an investigation to now we're talking about the president's policies towards Russia. So now they're getting tied in together, right? And let's look at the president's policies
Right.
towards Russia.
He's tried to
He has
weaken those
brokered a peace in
sanctions.
Syria against Putin.
Hold this thought.
Sent aid to
You'll
Ukraine.
First, we got to take a break. We're
Against
going to
Putin.
continue the conversation. Mike will start it off. President Trump was also reportedly raging mad over the Russian sanctions bill. We'll talk about that and more ahead. Back now with the panel, we're talking about the Washington Post reporting that President Trump continues to reject intelligence that shows Russia interfered in the 2016 election and supported his run for the White House. And the daily briefings, according to the Washington Post, reporting is structured not to upset him. But you were...
Well, I think it's important for us to focus on rhetoric versus actual policies, because to listen to Democrats, the president is in the Oval Office to basically just, do Putin's bidding, I suppose, the way they talk about it. And he brings some of that on himself because he needs to do these things. So I understand that. But if you actually look at the policies that he has enacted since he's been in office, they've been decidedly not what President Putin would want. He brokered a peace in Syria directly against the wishes of Russia. He has bolstered NATO nations. He took a look at it first, but he has since then reaffirmed countries like Poland and said, I am with you, we will protect you, directly against what Vladimir Putin wants. And he's begun giving aid to Ukraine. After, by the way, Joe Biden said to Ukraine, just stand down and let the Russians invade Crimea, he's actually started sending aid to Ukraine. So I think it's worth, in context, to put to what his actual policies towards Russia are versus the things that partisans try to add on to this as a part of the debate.
Except that he was yakking it up in the Oval Office with Russians after he fired Comey, bragging about how, now that Russian thing's off my back. He gave away intelligence concerning our ally in
Israeli
Israel.
intelligence.
Oh, that's right. That really upset the Israelis, and rightfully so. He was not happy with the sanctions bill that was passed in Congress, that was passed bipartisan. He's thinking about now reinstating some of the sanctions that the Obama administration
number one,
in response to the intelligence about the Russians interfering in our election. The Obama administration at least did something, and the President of the United States currently now wants to reverse some of those things. So let's be fair about what he's done also. That is, and also he's never, ever criticized Putin. He's criticized NFL players. He's criticized Gold Star mothers and wives, but he has never uttered a bad word about Putin because I guess Putin likes me and he thinks I'm a good guy.
It is interesting, though, Jack. I mean, in the Washington Post reporting of the more than 50 people interviewed, they said that if you say Russian interference to the president, he views it through the lens of it being about him, that it's an attempt to delegitimize him. I mean,
if
the
it's
idea
coming from the
is that scary that the leader of the free world is so wrapped up in it personally that it affects, perhaps, I mean, it seemed the indication is, I don't know, that it affects his national security decision.
You know, if that was true, and I'm not necessarily saying that it is, but I don't think that that's really the case. I think any leader has to separate himself from the issue to the degree that
you would hope.
Yeah, he or she can look at it objectively. I do want to point out on Israel and that, that bothered me, but Israel's never had a better friend in the White House, and I think that you get that from Israel.
It's a double-edged sword.
But I think in terms of what the president is doing, the things that Michael has outlined, they're substantive. And maybe he hasn't said something about Putin publicly. I don't remember Barack Obama doing it, but I do remember Obama opposing the sanctions. And let me say this is not a partisan statement. He absolutely did. I was in there. I was there when we were looking at it.
In a little while,
but let me say this. All presidents oppose sanctions because it takes away a diplomatic tool from them, and that's the situation.
First of all, if we
the sanctions on Iran, for example, the Obama administration was against it, not because of philosophy, but because they wanted to make the decision. I'm just trying to say why a
conversation about what's happening right now. I don't understand.
But that's also not true, because what we do know is that we know Russia's economy was crippling.
In the stock market now, you think
we know
stock market. I'm sorry.
We know Russia's economy was crippling. We know Russia's I mean, their economy.
Then there was that reset from Hillary Clinton.
We're talking about just recently, before Donald Trump became president of the United States. Anyone who knows anything about what's going on in Russia will tell you that they were just basically a gas station in the Arctic. Their economy was fundamentally crippling. And when we're talking about the public stance that Donald Trump takes, he will not. So you can say all that you want to say, but Donald Trump has been more critical of someone like Jamil Hill than he has of Vladimir Putin.
Let's take a quick break. Up next, what Omarosa Manigault Newman is now saying about her time in the West Wing. She sounds like she's shopping a book. We'll get the panel's take ahead. We should televise the commercial breaks, I'm telling you. The morning after Omarosa Manigault Newman's resignation from the White House was announced, she was on Good Morning America, teasing a tell-all book. Take a look, of course.
When I have a chance to tell my story, Michael, quite a story to tell. As the only African-American woman in this White House, as a senior staff and assistant to the president, I have seen things that have made me uncomfortable, that have upset me, that have affected me deeply and emotionally, that has affected my community and my people. And when I can tell my story, it is a profound story that I know the world will want to hear.
And we're back now with the panel. Angela, I mean, I'm big on loyalty, and I just think you leave your job under whatever, you've had the opportunity of a lifetime in the White House to serve the American people, and the next thing you do is you go on a morning television show and you're suddenly raising questions about the people you've just been serving with to pitch a book, to not even answer those questions, just to dangle them out there to whet the appetite of a publisher or reality. It just seems...
Yes, I'm reminded of a song about loyalty, but I shall not say it on air. The only thing that I would say to you, Anderson, is that there should be no surprises here. Number one, Omarosa was fired not once, but not twice, but this is the third time. We should understand that Omarosa and Donald Trump are cut from the same cloth, and it's about her first, self-preservation, saving face. Although you clearly can't save face anymore. Like, everybody knows exactly what was going on. She talked about her political acumen and why she was so ready for this job, and I'm still pressed to understand what her job description is and what it is that she was doing. She talked about my community and my people, and I'm hard pressed to understand who her community is and who her people are, because she even went so far as to support the president's position on Charlottesville. She didn't criticize him during the campaign. I've never heard her say anything about the Central Park.
I heard you say, we talked about this in the last hour, that more African Americans may have more of an opportunity in the White House with her actually not there. Is that? I don't want to mischaracterize.
I think that's. Well, and I'll go to defer to the Republican next, but I think that's maybe true. But I would be frustrated with the black folks that would opt to go in there. I don't see any policies that are designed for us that are good for us. Maybe they would say they're going to go in to make it better, perhaps, but I think that's a bad look.
So as someone who worked within the confines of minority outreach for many years with the Republican Party, very frustrated about the way things went or didn't go, so I kind of backed away from that for a little while and let the new generation come in and take that that cross to bear. But I still have a lot of friends that are in that space. And I can tell you that the presence of Omarosa was disruptive. It was frustrating. There are a lot of very qualified Black Republicans that would have been able to serve in different capacities in this White House that would have at least tried to do something good. I have a friend of mine now that's in one of the economic councils trying to do good. And it's not easy, but they're trying. However, Omarosa was constantly an impediment to anyone qualified to come in there and do their jobs. The stories are numerous, and she was so reviled by so many people. First of all, she was completely unqualified. She's been doing nothing but stealing the taxpayers' money this entire time because no one knows what the hell she was doing.
Tell us how you feel.
And when you have, you can just, the stories are lengthy, from her the despicable way that she used the White House as a backdrop for her wedding, and thinking that she was just going to bring 39 people into the White House to do some kind of photo shoot without giving anybody a heads up. Those kinds of things you just don't do. And she was notorious for that. Not only did that, she was just a terrible ambassador. She is an embarrassment at every single event that she went representing the minority outreach. She was damn near booed off the stage at NABJ, where she got nasty with Ed Gordon, at the National Action Network.
Can I defend Omarosa for a minute?
What is there to defend?
Let me defend Omarosa for one minute. Let me defend. No, I'm just joking. I just wanted to speak for a second. I don't really.
Which Wizard of Oz character is she, Ricardo?
When she went on The View and told people that they were going to bow down to Donald Trump,
she said
you have got to be kidding me. You know, this is who is a senior advisor in the White House representing the Black community minority outreach. No wonder there's no other.
Well, I think that African Americans need a voice in this White House. If we needed a voice anywhere, because the politics and the policies that have been coming from this White House or emanating from this White House are detrimental, Omarosa wasn't it.
No, she wasn't.
Can I, as the chief of staff of the RNC when we had the Growth and Opportunity Report, I believe that the Republican Party has a great message for African Americans, Latinos, Asian Pacific Islanders.
Not anymore.
Yes, they do.
Well,
Yes, they do. Right now we have a 20-year low in Black unemployment in this country, a 17-year low in the gap.
9 months.
A 17-year low in the gap between white and Black unemployment, a historic all-time low in Hispanic unemployment. There are, the Obama White House was much more diverse. Trump's White House should be more diverse, but Obama's White House oversaw the worst recovery in the Black community economically in modern history. We now have a 20-year low in Black unemployment. That is something to be talked about, and someone in the White House needs to be putting that message out that's better than this.
I got to get a break in. I want to thank everybody. Up next, former British Prime Minister David Cameron says President Trump's fake news jabs are dangerous for democracy worldwide. We'll get into the very real consequences with Christian Amanpour and Ambassador Ryan Crocker next. On this program, we try not to talk about the president's fake news jabs any more than necessary. They're clearly designed to undermine the reporting of this outlet and others that the president simply doesn't like, no matter how many sources or facts are included. But shouts of fake news are not just an annoying distraction or a political dog whistle. They are used to dismiss credible reports and stories that they just disagree with. That includes an Amnesty International report about prison deaths in Syria and claims from an official in Myanmar that the Rohingya Muslims who are being systematically raped and killed are, quote, fake news. Senator John McCain also weighed in yesterday afternoon, retweeting a report from the Committee to Protect Journalists with this comment: Press Freedom's annual report shows record number of journalists imprisoned worldwide in 2017, including 21 on fake news charges. The president must understand his harmful rhetoric only empowers repressive regimes to jail reporters and silence the truth. Earlier, I spoke to CNN's chief international correspondent, Christian Amanpour, and Ryan Crocker, former U.S. ambassador to 6 Middle Eastern countries, including Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Christian, we're in this extraordinary situation where dictators now can dismiss a free press as fake news and are basically given permission to do so by the leader of the free world.
Anderson, you know, from my vantage point here overseas, and I've been following and tracking this ever since the word fake news came out of the president's mouth, before he was even inaugurated, we have seen an exponential increase in the harassment, the imprisonment, the assault of journalists all over the world. You just have to look at the statistics at the Committee to Protect Journalists and others who track journalist safety. It really is a problem, whether it's in Russia with Vladimir Putin, whether it's in Turkey with with President Erdogan, or in the Philippines with President Duterte, and many other countries. Of course, when they see the President of the United States, first of all, it gives them a carte blanche, but even worse, they figure that if it comes from the President of the United States, at least he must know what he's talking about. There must be a grain of truth. It's not like they're saying, oh, well, he's giving us cover. They think maybe he's actually speaking the truth against us, and that's what's very, very dangerous.
Ambassador Crocker, I mean, Russia, Syria, China, Myanmar, Philippines, Turkey, Libya, to name just a few, are all countries whose leaders have recently invoked fake news to dismiss legitimate news stories. I mean, you've certainly dealt with repressive regimes.
Well, exactly, Anderson. It's as Christiane says. This is just their golden opportunity that if the President of the United States says it, they can say it too. The climate has gotten a lot dicier out there now around the world because of fake news. It's also gotten dicey with the media as the enemy of the American people. A lot of other autocrats out there just too happy to pick that up and substitute the nationality of choice for the American people. So, you know, what happens in Washington doesn't stay in Washington.
You know, Christiane, the press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, was given an opportunity to actually speak out on the importance of press freedom and freedom of the press around the world. And I want to play you what she said when she was asked about this.
Is the White House concerned at all about authoritarian regimes adopting this phrase, fake news, to try to delegitimize the press? And does President Trump bear any responsibility for the popularization of this phrase among some world leaders?
I think the White House is concerned about false and inaccurate information being pushed out and to mislead the American people. Our concern is making sure that the information that the people receive in this country is fair and accurate, and when it isn't, that it's corrected in the same fashion in which it was first presented when it was wrong, which is very rarely the case.
I mean, that's it.
Anderson, listen, this is really a moment that needs to be crystallized and run with, because what she is saying is, you know, there are things we don't like what you say about us. Therefore, we say fake news. You know, I know, everybody knows that when legitimate news organizations make mistakes like ours, like the New York Times, whatever it might be, we correct it, we take accountability measures, and we do not let false or mistakes stand. So it is unfair and incorrect to accuse legitimate news organizations of deliberately peddling fake news. This is really serious, and it just has to stop, because it is undermining not just our safety, but the credibility of democracy and the fight against corruption and the legitimacy of our order, our world order.
And Ambassador Crocker, I mean, there are thousands of journalists who have paid with their lives at the, you know, there's the wall of the fallen journalists, fallen reporters who have tried to expose corruption or bear witness to war at the museum in Washington, D.C. 2,305 names and counting, including Americans like Jim Foley, Marie Colvin is on there, who Christiane certainly knew. I mean, do you think the president realizes what is at stake or cares at all?
I don't think he realizes it. Over the years, some of my very best friends have been international correspondents. They get the story and took a full year to recover. So, you know, to bring you news that is anything but fake, some of the best journalists in the world put their life at risk.
Yeah. Ambassador Crocker, I appreciate your time. And Christiane Amanpour, thanks very much. Up next, we remember the 26 victims of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting 5 years later.